So we will talk about the land use, so the patterns of settlement and occupation of the Amazon throughout time. So let's start talking about the first humans. Usually people think about occupation as the Europeans arriving in South America in 1500 or even with 1492. Anyway, we're going back to the first humans that actually reached South America. Remember that South America, except for Antarctica, South America was the last continent that humans set foot on. Okay, and this only happened about 15,000 years ago. Okay, so humans originated in Africa, spread from Africa into Asia about 70,000 years ago, and then Europe, Australia, and they only crossed the Beringia, the land bridge connecting Asia and North America, where today is like Russia and Alaska. That was only possible during the glacial period, because during the glacial period this area was connected, and then people could cross that bridge at about 20,000 years ago during the last glacial maximum, the last ice age. Okay, so from that point on, the weather became warmer. Okay. Everything I'm going to talk to you here is a combination of different areas of knowledge. Okay, we have made a lot of progress regarding the genomics, the genome, the DNA, the complete DNA of people from South America, including ancient DNA or DNA that we get from fossils. Okay, from things that are dead for a long time. Okay. We can get DNA from people or animals or plants that are dead for thousands or even millions of years, okay, or 1 million years at least. So using genomics, using the DNA combined with the archaeology, okay, the artifacts that are found, the culture, and also anthropological studies, linguistic studies, studies of the culture, of the habits, we can come up with a pretty good idea of what happened, or not, well, a reasonably good idea of what happened. So, like I said, during the last glacial maximum, people crossed for the first time to the Americas, to North America. There was no people here before that, and then these ancestors they colonized and gave rise to what we know as the Clovis culture. These culture of hunters gatherers in North America that are famous for the arrowheads that they made for hunting mammoths and other animals. And then eventually they colonized South America. These North Americans went from Central America and colonized South America at about 15,000 years ago. Okay, we have fossils in South America of about 14,000 years ago, and then after it wasn't one cross. I mean, there's different waves of people crossing from North America. So 15,000 years ago is estimated the first arrival. Then at 12,000 years ago, there's a second arrival of the people from the Clovis culture that replaced the previous one. And then 9,000 years ago, we have another crossing, and then so one lineage replaces the other, okay, and established as we know today. Okay, the Pleistocene ended when the Holocene started. The Pleistocene ended and the Holocene started about 11.5 or 11.6 thousand years ago. Okay, that's the end of the ice age. Then we get a warmer climate, and then you have the evolution of people and all the other animals and plants here. And it's interesting because you have the extinction of the megafauna. And there's a big debate in the literature as to whether the megafauna, these large animals that live not only here but in other parts of the world, were extinct by humans hunting them, like woolly mammoths and other animals. In South America, for example, when humans arrived, there were like giant sloths, like giant walking sloths. Today sloths are small and arboreal, but during that period, the sloths were huge and they were terrestrial. Okay, you have like glyptodonts, which were like car-sized armadillo-like animals. Okay, and toxodons, you had like elephants and relatives of the elephant and other animals that are really big, we call megafauna. And these animals were extinct towards the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene. Okay, well, it's been maybe giant sloths survived up until like maybe 6,000 years ago, but most of the other animals were gone by then. So that's the Holocene. There's some controversial sites, archaeological sites in South America that propose that humans were here more than 30,000 years ago, but that's controversial. I mean, there's not strong evidence for that. There's no genetic evidence for that. Only some controversial archaeological findings. Okay, so the consensus today, we may change that. We may find maybe that that's science. So new evidence in the future might give us a different direction. But today, all the evidence, or most of the evidence that we have, points to the first arrival in South America at about 15,000 years ago. Okay, and the establishment of human populations in South America. But up until very recently, the idea was that South America was a very wild place, and even so, you had very few humans here, and it wasn't as occupied and colonized as other parts of the globe. Okay, including tropical forests. But that's been changing. So in recent years, archaeological findings have changed our view that the Amazon was really like an empty place. Okay, so some people argue with very good evidence that actually the Amazon forest was domesticated. Okay, plants and animals and people were living there, and plants and animals, or especially plants, were being domesticated, were like crops that were cultivated, including the acai, the extraction of the Brazil nut and the guaraná. There's several other plants that were being explored. Okay, so there's several archaeological sites along the Amazon basin. Okay, so you have many here. High density of anthropogenic soils in yellow here, which are soils that were worked up by people. So you know that people were there working the soil. Okay, including some like large earthworks, modifications of the soil to produce something. On Marajó Island, you have that along the coast here and some areas here. Okay, and many archaeological sites. So there is indication that we call like terra preta. So this is a dark organic matter that you find in the soil that's associated with human presence and human activity for many thousands of years in the past, including ceramics, right? And also the linguistic, when the Europeans arrived here, you have a diversity of linguistic groups here. You know, there are many different languages spoken by many different groups of people. So that all of this evidence suggests that there was probably something like around 8 million people in the Amazon in the 1500s when Europeans first arrived. Okay, of course, a lot of that was decimated later with colonization, especially diseases that were brought from Europe to them. But that they had a very strong society and lots of people modifying the forest. So the forest wasn't that like remote and uninhabited place as we thought it was. If we think about deforestation, historically speaking, okay, so you have humans occupying the forest and cultivating the land and doing agriculture. They're doing slash and burn, like burning the forest to do agriculture. That was done in the past. But then, if we think about the more recent past, the 19th century, for example, you have the rubber boom, right? The rubber boom was really changed the face of the forest, because it brought a lot of attention, a lot of work and a lot of money to the region, right? We're going to talk about that in a few in the next slide. So between the late 1900s and the early 20th century, you have the late 19th century and the early 20th century, you have the rubber boom in the Amazon. Then along the 20th century, you have cattle ranching. The second half of the 20th century, you have cattle ranching expanding. In the 1970s, with the military dictatorship, you have this idea of colonizing the Amazon to protect the borders. And then you have the construction of the Trans-Amazonian Highway. And then you have logging, right? So for timber becomes a very precious material for cutting the forest. Mining also becomes a threat, especially from the 1980s to the present. The construction of huge hydroelectric dams for generating energy was an issue, starting in the 1980s, but especially in the 2000s and 2010 to today is a very pressure. It's a strong pressure against the forest and biodiversity, and the agribusiness as well, especially soybean plantations and other crops. If you look at the map here, you see clearly that the forest area is the green. The old deforestation before 1987 is in red. So you see that a lot of the eastern Amazon was already deforested by the late 1980s. Okay, a bit of the northern Mato Grosso and southern Amazon, some areas here and some areas here in the state of Acre. But when you look at deforestation between 1988 and 2018, the more recent deforestation in the last 30 years, you see there's a big damage here in Rondônia. Okay, it was all basically the deforestation was going on in the last 30 years. Northern Mato Grosso, you know, the trend that was already in place expanded along the roads, you know, from here in this area of Pará, southern Pará. This is the Trans-Amazonian Highway, okay? It goes from the northeast and goes here and then goes here. So that's the Trans-Amazon. So you see, especially in Pará, the first half, this area, this part here is basically you cannot cross here, right? This road from Manaus to Rondônia here is also basically 4x4 extreme only drivers only. So there's no traffic here. People want to open this road and keep it with high traffic, but that doesn't happen. You have a road also from Manaus to Roraima here. Interesting, there's no bridges crossing the Amazon River, none. It's not because it's hard to build them, because you could easily build them, but there's just no roads, as you see. So the only reason to have a road would be here. Someday that will probably happen. And, you know, maybe here someday, but there's no roads on the other side, or no main roads on the other side. Anyway, you will see later that the pattern of deforestation is tightly linked with roads. As you can see here, you have this pattern of, you know, have a big road and then you have smaller roads crossing the big road, and you have this clear pattern of deforestation also happening in Rondônia. So you see that most of the pressure, deforestation pressure, comes from the south and the east of the Amazon. Okay. So let's talk about each one of them. The rubber boom in the Amazon, like I said, in the late 19th century and the first part of the 20th century, was at the same time responsible for a huge growth of cities like Manaus and Belém. Both Manaus and Belém grew, especially Manaus. This is the opera house in Manaus, which is kind of shows the richness that came with the rubber boom. And at the same time, you had poverty, you had slavery, you have forced migrations. So Indians were enslaved to work at rubber plantations. People sometimes worked from really harsh conditions. Okay, like I said, you get the latex from, you have to scratch the tree, you have to let it drop here, the latex drops here, and you collect that, and then you make some rubber, big rolls of rubber. This was going on until the 1913, 1917, the early part of the 20th century. Then the British smuggled trees from the rubber tree to Southeast Asia and started planting there. And then they moved their operations to Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. So there was a big decline in the rubber in the Amazon, and sort of a collapse of the economy. But interestingly, Henry Ford, the American responsible for the Ford Company and Motors, he established a factory. He basically went to the middle of the jungle and established this city that he was called Fordland or Fordlandia in Portuguese, which was kind of an utopic place where he would grow the rubber trees and would have a factory and would produce the tires and for the cars, and then anyway, it was right after the crash of the rubber boom in the Amazon. And anyway, it didn't work out. So what you have today is just a bunch of ruins there. He sold the place back to Brazil in the 1940s. 20-25 years later. Today it's abandoned. It's like a ghost town in the middle of the Amazon. I want to call attention to Chico Mendes, this man here, who was a union leader in Acre, in the rubber producers, and he was actually shot in 1986, 87, if I remember correctly. I think 87. He was shot by landowners who didn't like his union activities, but he's kind of a symbol of the protection of the forest, because he was very active in protecting the rights of the local people, and so he became kind of a symbol of the Amazon and Amazon protection. Chico Mendes is his name. Unsustainable cattle ranching is a big problem. As you see here, the cause of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon between 2000 and 2005, most of it was cattle ranching. Okay, so most of it, 65 to 70% was cattle ranching. Small scale agriculture was responsible for 20 to 25, large scale agriculture up to 10%, logging and other causes. So big problem, okay, recently. And you do some people do slash and burn to convert forests to pastures, okay, and then put the cattle there, and don't keep any tree up, cut the trees that have timber value, sell them, and then just transform the landscape from forest to pastures and grassland. Illegal logging is also a problem. It's still, it's a very recent problem, including the previous supposedly Minister for the Environment, or perhaps should be called Minister Against the Environment, is being charged for facilitating illegal logging in the Amazon. Anyway, so you see here these trucks taking these huge logs. You see that there's no license plate here. It's not because he forgot. It's because it's illegal. So they don't want to be identified. So that's why they just remove the plates. Anyway, this map here shows the value in dollars per hectare of timber. And you see that it's very heterogeneous across the Amazon. So you have a very valuable timber here, some here up north, some here. So these areas are under strong pressure from people occupying. They occupy public lands, protected areas, indigenous reservations, and to extract and log. Okay, and that creates a lot of conflict between indigenous people and small farmers and big landowners. And so it's a big problem, a social problem especially in Pará state, and people often get killed by that, including Dorothy Stang, which is a religious worker who was there and was killed years ago because of for protecting the rights of people who didn't want to sell their land for logging. Anyway, it's a major issue. Illegal mining is another issue, which is it's a problem today as well, because the current government is really friendly with illegal mining in general, including protected areas and indigenous areas. And that's what you get when you allow that. You get a really devastating effect on the forest. So this used to be flooded forest, now is just this mess. This map shows the many mining activities throughout the basin. You see that there's a trend that it doesn't happen that much in the core here, but it goes around, Peru, Colombia. The border between Brazil, Colombia, and Venezuela is and then also in the southern border here in Brazil with the Cerrado, you have many areas with a very intensive mining. This is a picture of Serra Pelada. That's a beautiful picture by the famous photographer Sebastião Salgado. This is in 1986, if I remember correctly. Serra Pelada was this mine. It was a symbol of this gold rush that happened there. So thousands and thousands of people flocked this huge pit. It was like the largest open mine in the world at that time. Today it's a lake. It was flooded to prevent people from doing that. So, and it's still in dispute if they're going to keep mining or not. But that was a gold mine. Hydroelectric dams are a problem. They're a problem for a long time. And in the 1980s, there was the construction of the Balbina Dam, a reservoir, the Tucuruí, also in the 1980s. Balbina was a horrible in terms of the environment. The trees were left there. They didn't cut the trees. The lake was shallow and didn't produce enough energy. Anyway, it was just not a very good project. And then you have more recent projects like the Jirau and Santo Antonio in the Madeira River, changing the dams. They change the flow of the river. Okay, you flood areas, you change sometimes. Sometimes you have rapids, you have waterfalls, not waterfall, but rapids, and so you change the flow from a fast-flowing river to a slow or flowing river or a lake. You change that. You change diversity. Species cannot live there. You create a barrier for fish to migrate upstream for reproduction. Even if you put a fish ladder, then helps a little bit, but not doesn't solve the problem. And again, one of the major contentions area was Belo Monte, which is just about to finish the construction. It's a major problem, both environmental and social, because it affects a really large area for Indians and people who live there for thousands of years, doing what they do. And now you change everything. You change the whole dynamics of the place. You change the environment. You change the social dynamics. You change the river. You cannot fish. So it's a very, very strong impact, local impact. Okay. And that's being done in a really high intensity and speed. So this is the number of dams planned or under survey, which are the yellow dots. The ones under construction are this one, like Belo Monte is already done. And then in operation are the ones in blue. So it's a lot of that. And in these pink areas are the indigenous reservations. Okay, so you see that a lot of them are near or almost within indigenous reservations. That has a lot of impact on them. So a big problem. And finally, roads and rivers are, the rivers are there, you can't do anything about it, but roads that you build are a main driver of deforestation, okay? 95% of deforestation happens within 5.5 kilometers of a road or 1 kilometer of a navigable river, okay? So, because to cut the forest, you have to get there, and to get there, you need to get there by boat or by truck, right? So you need a road or a river, right? And 35% of the Brazilian Amazon is highly accessible by either river or road. Okay, only this area here in like the Western Amazon, some parts here are not easily accessible. And the deforestation on accessible land is a lot more common in unprotected areas than in protected areas. So protected, when you have protected areas, you have less deforestation than when you have unprotected areas. So in unprotected regions, you have 43% deforestation. Okay, in protected areas, even in protected areas, you have deforestation, but it's only 10%. It's smaller than. So even if you don't protect the area that much, if you you cannot enforce protection, but at least if it's a protected area, it has less impact for deforestation. Okay, so protected areas avoided or displaced 34 to 39,000 square kilometers of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon in a recent study. Okay, this was a projection done 20 years ago by Lawrence and collaborators regarding the impact of roads. What would be in 2020 with an optimistic projection. So if we look today, right, the black is heavily degraded, the red is moderately degraded, the yellow lightly, and the green is pristine. I think some of this has been confirmed. So especially, like I mentioned before, in the Eastern Amazon and Southern Amazon, actually, I think the projection was really optimistic. In other areas, not that much. So like this road here, for instance, it hasn't been open. I mean, it's there, but it doesn't work. I mean, it hasn't been restored to be fully functional. If they want to do it now. Okay, and if they do it, then you can see that in a few years you're going to have this pattern here. So you still don't have that much. Okay. Also here you don't have this strong constraint here because there's no easy access here. So I don't think it's not that bad. But in some areas are, especially in Eastern Amazon and Southern Amazon. So the pressure comes from the south and the east, especially in Brazil, from the south and the east towards the west. Okay. Right.